Yes, Mr. Kinnear.
Sir, good afternoon. May I now call Station Manager Daniel Kipling?
Right, thank you.
I do solemnly, sincerely and truly
declare and affirm
that the evidence I shall give
shall be the truth,
the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kipling. Sit down and make yourself comfortable.
First of all, would you please confirm your name for the record?
Daniel Kipling.
Thank you, Mr. Kipling. First of all, many thanks for coming along to give evidence today. It's much appreciated. In front of you, you have a blue folder, which hopefully should contain the following. Your statement of the 22nd of February of this year. And then behind that ought to be an exhibit to that statement, which is an annotated map of the area surrounding the tower.
Sorry, what was the second one?
The second tab. Or the final tab.
So, yes.
And in tab B, hopefully you'll find your contemporaneous notes.
Yes.
And in particular, at the back of tab B, you'll find the contemporaneous notes which you annotate. Is that right?
Yes.
And have you read those documents recently?
I have, yes.
And you confirm their contents are true?
Yes.
And you're content for them to stand as your evidence of the inquiry?
Yes.
Thank you. Now, in respect of the contemporaneous note to which you've annotated, first of all, when did you add those notes?
That would have been, I think I gave my police interview in January, or February maybe, so it would have probably been December, I would say, before the police interview.
And what was the purpose of making those notes?
It was preparation for my police interview. I'm just adding other memories to what I'd written on the night.
That's useful, thank you. Now, because you've given your statement, I'm not going to go through each and every aspect of your statement. Indeed, other matters have been covered by other witnesses. I'd like to focus on the setting up of the BA main control arrangements on the night. If any of my questions are unclear, please say so, and I'll rephrase. And also, if at any time you require a break, please shout. Now, if I could just deal with some basics. First of all, is it right that you joined the LFB in 2010?
Yes.
And that in June 2017 you held the same rank you do today, namely station manager?
Yes.
And in 2017, what was your particular role and function?
Sorry, on the day? Or
As at June 2017, what was your role and function? Ignoring on the night, what job did you do?
A station manager in operational policy, the fire team.
Okay. Now, in terms of your arrival at the tower, we have your mobilisation time as 01:26, on the road at 01:28, and your arrival at 0200 hours. Does that sound accurate?
Yes.
On arrival, you located the ICP, is that right?
Yes.
And this was the command unit on Bowmore Road, is that right?
I'm not sure what road.
Let's refresh your memory from the map.
Yeah. Do you know, I can't actually read this map. If you go to my map,
Yep.
It's the command unit which I've done, CU brackets ICP.
If Paul could bring up the exhibit to the statement, which is Met 000, yes, 15750.
Yeah, so CU brackets ICP.
Thank you. And it's in the bottom
Bowmore
right.
Road, yes. Yeah.
Thank you. Now, if I could turn to your witness statement, page 5, the 5th paragraph, 3 lines from the bottom. There you describe the command unit and that there was loads going on. There were senior officers there, perhaps 3 or 4 station managers and 2 group managers. Do you remember, are you able to identify the particular individuals who were within the CU?
The only one I can remember is group manager Richard Welsh.
Okay. Do you remember, apologies for pressing this, do you remember whether station manager Loft was in the CU?
Station manager Brett Loft stood outside the command unit.
Okay. Who did you understand the IC to be at the point you arrived?
Richard Welsh.
Do you remember when you were at the CU hearing any discussion between officers about the continued application of the stay put policy?
No.
Did you overhear any conversation regarding the need to evacuate, whether that be total or partial evacuation?
No.
Okay. I'd now like to talk to you about your tasking in relation to the BA main control. And you say at page 5 of your statement, the 6th paragraph, that Group Manager Welsh asked you to do BA main control. Do you remember the exact form of words or the gist of the words that Mr. Welsh said to you?
I don't remember the exact form of words, but he requested that I did BA main control. It was brief.
And did he direct you where to set up the main control?
He asked me to get a command unit and set it up.
Did he give you any briefing as to how much BA was at that stage being used as part of search and rescue missions?
No.
Did you discuss at all the need for any EDBA wearers?
No.
Did you consider raising the need for EDBA wearers with Mr. Welsh at the time you arrived?
I didn't at that stage of the incident, because of the messages that I'd heard en route. I knew that there would be EDBA wearers in attendance, or certainly en route, and it was clear to me that EDBA was going to be a consideration.
In relation to the FSG calls you heard whilst you were en route, were you able to register whilst you were driving whether these were on the higher floors of the tower or not?
Sorry, the FSG calls?
Yes. Were you able to hear those calls?
No, I was concentrating on driving. The only information that I was taking in en route that I can remember is the resourcing information.
Okay.
So the make pumps 20, make pumps 40.
Were you given any briefing as to the number of FSG calls and where those FSG calls were coming from as within the tower?
No, it wouldn't have been relevant to the role that he asked me to do.
Okay. And why do you say it's not relevant?
BA main control is a logistical function and resourcing function that sits behind entry control. So it's not involved in fire survival guidance. It's involved with supplying the bridgehead with the resources that they need to carry out the tasks that they are required to do.
As you arrived at 200 hours or thereabouts, and you were able to see the tower and you saw the extent of the fire spread at that stage, did you have any thoughts as to whether SDBA was going to be sufficient in order to get higher up the tower?
I don't recall having those thoughts at the time when I was walking up to the command unit. I wasn't in receipt of all of the incident information, so it wouldn't have been appropriate for me to have those thoughts without receiving further information.
At the bottom of page 5 of your statement, at the top of page 6, you discuss there the 3 stages of BA control. Could I ask you, before we come on to the next questions, to look at policy number 466? And Paul, would you be able to bring this up? The reference is LFB 60, so we go, 173. First of all, Mr. Kipling, are you familiar with this policy?
Yes, I am.
And if I could ask Paul to go to the bottom of page 32, internal 32 within that policy, and in particular, might I invite you to refresh your memory of points 32.1, 32.2 and 32.3. And Paul, we'd like to turn over the page to 32.3. Thank you. Thank you. You've read that?
Yes.
Thank you. Looking at particular at 32.1, is it fair to say that the BA main control is essentially about the management and control of BA resources at an incident?
Yes.
And to be clear, would your role as officer in charge of the BA main control include you making decisions as to committing firefighters under air or not?
No.
That would be done presumably by the entry control officer at the bridgehead?
Yes.
And would your role include giving BA wearers any briefing of any nature as to what would be awaiting them once they were deployed within the tower?
No. The extent, when I talk about briefing, the extent of my briefing would be to ask the BA wearers to report to wherever they're required to report to, and then request that they come back into my staging area. so that they can be appropriately rested.
When they were coming back from the tower, did you have any system whereby you were able to debrief those who'd been deployed in the tower, so you got an idea of what the conditions were like to inform your decision whether EDBA was required, for example?
It wouldn't have been my decision about whether EDBA was required. The decision for committing EDBA crews into the tower would have been made at the bridgehead or from the incident commander. My responsibility was to provide the bridgehead with what they required.
If I could ask you to turn to page 6 of the statement and the 4th paragraph on that page, the last line. You there discuss the equipment that you need, and you refer to taking 2 forward information boards and a telemetry board from a nearby appliance with you. When you refer to a telemetry board, just so I understand your evidence, do you mean they're an entry control board?
Yes.
Apologies for asking a dumb question, but given the nature of your role as being in charge of the BA main control, why would you need a telemetry board as well?
So it just seemed like a good idea for me to have additional BA resources in the staging area where all the BA resources were going to be, and knowing that I didn't want to be in a position where there was a request coming in for a telemetry board and I wasn't able to provide that. It's just a good bit of equipment which would potentially have come in useful.
Okay.
Sorry, and the other thing about that is it's got the aid memoirs in it, which I needed to perform my function.
Can you help us with the aid memoirs? What are you referring to there?
So in the back of the telemetry boards, there's a range of prompts or notes that are prompts to assist in various different functions of BA entry control, BA. And one of them that's particularly relevant to main control is a main control aid memoir.
And do they prompt you as what the requirements are of policy, etc.? Is that the type of information they provide you?
It's a prompt sheet which says these are your responsibilities as the officer in charge of BA main control.
Yeah. Going back briefly to policy 466, and Paul, if I could ask you to turn up page 33 and paragraph 33.7. Now that refers there to the BA main control board, which it states that the station manager in charge of a BA main control must use to record and update information. If we could turn to page 37 within the policy. Did you have one of those boards with you on the night?
I did, yeah.
Thank you. Can you briefly explain to us how you work with these boards?
So this board is essentially an overall. It's an overall record of where your wearers are and how many of them you've got. So as I mentioned earlier, it's primarily a resourcing function, BA main control. So this board is designed to assist in keeping a handle on how many resources you've got and where they are. And also, as you can see, there's various other parts in it, such as the clock is a good example, where you can match up the information that is on the bridgehead, or the relevant information that's on the bridgehead, to the information that you have where your staging area is.
Thank you. If we can go now back to page 6 of your statement, and it's the 3rd paragraph, last line. We don't necessarily need to go to it, but just so you've got a reference point. You say you saw Station Manager Loft and you grabbed him for your team. Where were you when you saw Station Manager Loft?
At the incident command point.
Okay. And were you aware at that stage that Mr. Loft had been tasked with managing FSGs when he'd first arrived on the scene?
No, I wasn't.
No. Were you aware whether Station Manager Loft had ever formally handed over that role, the FSG role, to any person at any stage?
No, this is not an element of my statement of the evening that I remember very well, but I do write in my contemporaneous notes that I wrote that day that I requested Station Manager Loft as a resource, probably because he was there and I know him, and it was given to me.
Thank you. I'm now going to turn to a separate topic, which is the initial setting up in CU7. And you explain in paragraph 6, the 6th paragraph, 3rd line, that you found a command unit and you're intending to use that for the BA main control. Just for the sake of clarity, that's the command unit that was parked on Grenfell Road, is that right? If you'd like to refer back to your map, which it may be useful for Paul to bring up. It's Met.
Yeah, and the other one is easy. It's easy to read on here.
15730. Sorry,
Grenfell Road, yeah.
15750.
Yeah, that's the one next to where it says Grenfell Road.
And marked CU.
Yeah.
Thank you. Turning over the page at page 7, you describe tasking firefighters Gary Moore and James Power with going into the tower and with getting as much information as possible about what was going on there. Do you remember exactly the information you asked them to obtain?
I can only refer back to my statement. I can only refer back to my statement, which I believe says... so who was in charge of the bridgehead, the names of the people doing entry control, how many crews were being committed, and how quickly they were going through resources.
Turning to the next topic, it's you went into the tower with Station Manager Loft. That's right, isn't it?
I never entered the tower at any point.
Oh, right. You approached in the vicinity of the tower, should put it be more
near
accurate.
To where there were the two people over the car bonnet, yes.
And you got to the covered walkway on the south side of the tower, to be precise.
Yes.
And you say, looking at page 8...
Sorry, this is after I'd been taken off the command unit.
Yes.
Yeah.
And if to give you some context, if I can ask you to turn to page 8 of your statement in the second paragraph, you'd left the command unit. I knew that I needed communications between the bridgehead and myself and told Brett to stay there. Under this covered area, which I thought was near to the entrance of the tower. And then you go on in the next paragraph to say, my plan was to find a place or CU, so this is before he rejected, as it were, from the CU, to organise crews and send them to him. He could then in turn send them into the tower when they were needed. Looking at what you say in the statement there, is it accurate to say that at this stage you're envisaging having main control split in 2 stages? The first with you at a command unit, once you'd found one, and the second with Loft under the walkway. Is that a fair summary?
Yes, I suppose so. My intention was to have main control operating where I had the space and we were away from the danger of the falling debris, and ideally with a command unit. Now, recognising that that is going to be a distance from the entrance to the tower, I needed to have eyes and ears at the entrance to the tower so that I could have a physical person making that communication with the bridgehead. The other intention was to have a second, I suppose, forward command stage where I could make sure that I would run out of BA wearers before that forward command area ran out of BA wearers, which meant that the bridgehead would always be able to get BA wearers.
I understand. Would it have been preferable, looking at the system, what you were busy at the time, to have set up the main control under the walkway so as to only have one location?
No, I don't believe it was. There was an awful lot of activity going on under that walkway, as well as a lot of falling debris. Yeah. I knew that this was going to be a significant BA deployment, at times up to 40 BA wearers in one place. It might be helpful if I explain a little bit about what's involved physically with BA main control.
Please do.
So, BA main control is responsible for marshalling resources, as I mentioned earlier. So you're talking about all of the BA wearers that you're going to need for the deployment, but also there's a servicing function that gets performed. So when a set gets used, or if you run out of sets, spare sets are available. So you need to service those sets. And you need to be careful about how you service those sets because they need to stay clean. And there's also a responsibility on BA main control to ensure that your firefighters are well rested. So to do that under the covered walkway with all of the falling debris and activity that was going on, it would not have been an appropriate place to carry out that function.
Thank you. Looking at the role of Mr. Loft, how are you intending for him to communicate with the bridgehead? Was it by radio, by mobile, by runner, how?
Yeah, by runner, if radios weren't feasible.
And at that stage, had you established how practicable it was to communicate with the bridgehead by radio?
I had my radio on the command channel. I knew that there was a lot of radio traffic going on in the command channel. However, my request to Brett when I left him there was to make contact with the bridgehead. Yeah. So, given the distance between the inside of the tower and where I left Brett, that would have been a feasible thing for him to do.
Okay.
this is also happening at the same time as I've sent 2 firefighters to actually go to the bridgehead and establish more information about it. So I'm still very much in the information gathering stage at this point.
That's useful because if we don't necessarily need to turn to it, but in the annotated contemporaneous note at the top of page 5, you refer to, later on, use Mr. Saunders as a runner, and you say he played a pivotal role.
Yes.
Again, it may be a question of the obvious, but what are the advantages of using runners over and above using radios or indeed mobile phones that we've heard about this morning?
Yeah, calling Nick a runner is underestimating the valuable job that he did for me.
I apologise, probably disrespectful to his rank, but it seems to be the most useful
not at all.
word.
It's important for me to say that because Nick performed a very valuable role for me. There is for me, having a physical link for very important roles where I've got a trusted officer who can go and physically talk to the people who I need to get important messages to. I know those messages then get delivered, and then I have that person come back to me and say, so if you have sometimes if you have a face-to-face communication with someone, it's just a much more, for a very important job such as BA, it's a much more robust way of communicating a message when there is an awful lot of communications going on at that incident.
As you were part of the information gathering stage, what efforts did you make to identify who's in charge at the bridgehead of the BA staging area, first of all?
Sorry, the BA staging area at the bridgehead?
Yes.
That was in my brief to Firefighter Moore and Firefighter Power, and I think that they took another firefighter with them as well. I can't remember.
And were you aware that Watch Manager Watson was in charge of the staging area at that stage?
I can't remember the names, but when they came back, we wrote that information down on probably the forward information board.
Did you have cause to liaise with Watch Manager Watson at any stage during the course of the evening?
No, because I was getting the information on resources directly from Brett, who had that communication with the bridgehead.
And did you have, for the sake of clarity, did you have any direct communications with the bridgehead? First of all, any officer in charge of the bridgehead?
Not me directly, personally, no.
Okay. The next topic I'd like to discuss is the setting up of the main control by the leisure centre. You ended up at spot you've marked on the exhibited map, and if Paul could bring that up again, it's MET 15750. And I think you've marked it with the word benches
Yeah.
to the left of Kensington Leisure Centre. Is that right?
Yes.
You explained that there was a large area to hold crews, and you made the decision to set up there. How far away were you from Station Manager Loft?
Within eyesight.
Were you within shouting distance?
If it was necessary, I probably could have, but my understanding is that there was a lot of noise. I don't remember any noise, but I know that there must have been.
Apologies for jumping around your statement. If I could ask you to go to page 9, and it's the second paragraph there, the final sentence. You refer there to locating a spare CU that you could have used that was just too far away. And you say, I was in an ideal spot, and although a CU would have been useful, I felt that having one so far away would not have been practical. Could you help us? Can you explain precisely what you would have been able to do had you had the benefit of an orthodox CU?
Well, so a command unit has got various systems on it which may have existed. I think, so for instance, CSS, whiteboards. It's an indoor space, it's well lit, and you can organise your team that is assisting you just because you've got a room.
Everyone's in the same place.
Yes, but it does also have disadvantages. You are in a room, so you can't see what's going on. So sometimes that can limit your situational awareness. So there were many advantages to being out the front. I think that it was a blessing in disguise that we never moved it onto a command unit.
And situational awareness is one of those matters you referred to in the notes, on your contemporaneous note, and we don't need to go to it, but it's at page 3. Again, this may be a question of the obvious, but what are the advantages of having full situational awareness when you are in charge of the BA main control?
When you are performing a sector, which is, I suppose is a function of an incident structure, it's very important that you maintain a broader view of what's going on at the incident and you don't become tunnel visioned. So that is what we mean by situational awareness. It's my responsibility to have an eye on the bigger picture rather than individual details, which I will then allocate to people to carry out tasks for me.
And presumably situational awareness is a relevant factor when you're having to conduct dynamic risk assessments, for example.
Yes.
Yeah. Apologies again for asking the question about timing, but it's to try and get some fix. Are you able to assist us with the time at which you set up by the leisure centre?
I can only provide you with an estimate based on my actions. So if I arrived at 2, it would have taken me at least 5 minutes to put my PPE on and arrive at the command unit. It would have taken me at least another 5 minutes to get onto the first command unit, so 2:10.
Yeah.
And then I would say I was probably at an early estimate standing in front of the leisure centre starting to set up and get all my resources to me at about 20 past to 2:30. But that would be a guess based on the activity that I carried out, and time always goes much quicker than you think.
How did you then communicate to BA crews that BA main control was located where you were located?
When I arrived, there were BA wearers around, and that was absolutely one of my first tasks once I decided where I was going to do it. And there was a watch manager, Helen Christmas, who I know from working with her in the past, and I asked her to go round the incident grounds and get every single BA wearer that she saw who wasn't engaged in the task and send them to me, because this is where main control was. And I think Firefighter Moore probably helped me with that as well.
Did you send a message to the ICP that you'd set up BA main control by the leisure centre?
Yes, I did, yes.
Turning back to page 8 and your witness statement and the final paragraph on that page, you described firefighters Moore and Power coming back with a report about what was going on in the tower. Can you remember now how long it took for them to go to the tower and return back with the information you'd asked them to collate?
Sorry, can you repeat that question?
Yeah, how long did it take firefighters Moore and Power to go to the tower and come back and provide you with the information you directed that they collate?
It didn't seem like it took them a long time at all.
Okay. Do you remember in detail what they were able to tell you?
I don't remember in the detail, I'm afraid.
Okay. Were you handed any piece of paper by...
No.
Okay. If I can ask you to turn to page 9 in your witness statement and the first paragraph on that page, you say that firefighters Moore and Power were able to draw a sketch of the internal layout of the tower that you thought would be useful in briefing firefighters before they went in. Just to get some clarity over this point, are you talking about a sketch of the floor layout here or something broader than that?
No, this is just... So this is a common technique that we use, particularly in multiple floor blocks. I knew that in order to get to the bridgehead, they would have seen a safe floor. So I asked them to sketch out because often the floor layouts are replicated, and it was purely so that we could provide the firefighters a little bit of background in terms of what they were going in, so they had something in their mind before they went to the bridgehead to be properly briefed for their tasks.
You explained earlier on in your evidence the nature and limitations of the briefing, in inverted commas, that you gave to BA crews before they were deployed. Were you aware of the state of communications within the tower?
What do you mean by the state of communications?
Well, more particularly whether radio communications were effective or whether they were limited in their extent. So, for example, couldn't reach the higher levels of the tower.
That information did eventually come back to me through the BA crews talking about it when they came out of the tower.
How long into the night? Can you remember? After you'd set up, say, at 2:30, can you remember?
No, I can't. I'm sorry, I can't remember. It would have presumably been when the first BA crew started coming back.
Okay. Looking at page 9 of your statement, the third paragraph on that page, if I may summarise your evidence, you communicated with Mr. Loft by mobile phone every 5 minutes that he was getting demand for crews from the bridgehead and that your role was to ensure that Mr. Loft didn't run out of BA crews to send in. first of all, do you agree that's a fair summary of what's set out there?
Sorry, I'm just looking for the bit that you just read out.
Let's just look at it. If you look at page 9, third paragraph on that page starts, "I called Brett on my mobile phone."
Yeah.
And what I'm suggesting to you, a fair summary is that...
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't hear your summary. I was looking for what you were reading out on
Sorry.
there.
Summarise, you communicated with Mr. Loft by mobile phone every 5 minutes.
Yes.
That he was getting demand for crews from the bridgehead, and that your role was to ensure that he didn't run out of BA crews.
Yes.
Looking at each element of that, do you know whether Mr. Loft was receiving the request for BA wearers by radio from the bridgehead?
I don't know.
Don't know. Do you know how he was getting his information from the bridgehead at all?
I can't remember, I'm sorry, but I know that he was getting information. I was getting fairly accurate, regular updates from him.
Okay. When he called you, would he give you a request for a specific number of BA wearers?
Yes.
Yes. And would he specify that those BA crews should be SDBA or EDBA?
Yes.
Yes. Did you then have a system for recording which BA wearers or how many BA wearers you were sending in?
A system for how many we were sending in. I knew how many we were sending in. I knew how quickly we were going through BA wearers.
So you're monitoring it?
Yes, and I knew whether they were SDBA or EDBA.
Yeah. Flowing from that, I think at page 10 of your statement, the third paragraph, you say that you felt that you had an accurate record of who you were committing. Would that have been a written record, or was it just your assessment of the situation?
Yes, it was a written record, but it wasn't a written record of individuals, it was a written record of numbers and types of set.
Okay.
So I wouldn't have had the accuracy of the names of the people. That would have taken place at the bridgehead.
Okay. When the BA wearers returned from their deployment, did they report back to you at the main control so you knew who'd come back, or would that be, again, something that would be managed at the bridgehead?
They would go through the bridgehead because they would have to give their tallies in. They would presumably do a debrief at the bridgehead, and then they would come to my area where they would rest. Because of the severity of the incident, and certainly there were occasions when firefighters were in a very distressed state, I couldn't say that every single one came back to my area. But the majority did.
Thank you. Could I ask you to turn to page 9 of your statement and the final paragraph? And I'll let you read it this time instead of racing on.
Okay.
We discussed Mr. Saunders' role as a runner earlier on. Now, you say here that you obviously had a line of communication with the ICU, and you say in the next sentence that your first message was that you needed as many BA resources as they could send. Now, to be clear, when you're referring to BA resources here, do you mean BA wearers or spare BA sets or what?
It would have been wearers because you get an operational support unit that turns up and they have spare sets with them. So yeah, it would have been. I needed BA wearers. They were the finite resource at the incident.
And did you specify that you needed EDBA or?
Yes.
Yes. When you specified that, would you give numbers or just say as many as you've got?
We would give an exact time when we believed we were going to run out of BA wearers, EDBA or SDBA. We would tell them how quickly we were going through them, and we would tell them how many we would need when that time arrived.
Again, with apologies for asking you a question about timing, can you give us a rough estimate as to what time you asked Mr. Saunders to take that message to or that request to the ICU?
I think I write in one of either my contemporaneous notes or my police statement, I write a time when we get low on EDBA, whereas in my area, not at the incident, I think I get down to 4, and then a large number turn up. Now that time is the time that we anticipated running out. And so it would have been about 2 to 2.5 hours before then.
Okay. Do you remember getting any response back from the ICU in response to your request?
Yes, yeah, we got replies.
Yeah. Going back to page 10, the second paragraph on that page, the first sentence, you explained that Mr. Saunders handled communication between you and the ICU throughout the night. Are you able to say generally whether you had a good line of communication with the ICU?
It worked, yes.
And did you feel that the messages that were being sent through were being received and you were getting meaningful responses back?
Yes. I mean, the best sign of that is that when we knew we were going to run out of BA wearers, we got a load more BA wearers. We never, at no point did we run out of the resources we needed.
You also say, and maybe useful if you can turn to page 12 of your statement, the second paragraph, third line, that after you'd set up the system, Mr. Saunders came and told you that there was an airwave channel sorted out for you. Did you use that channel to communicate with the CU?
I believe at this stage that function was being carried out by Sector Commander Command Support, who I think was Lee Drawbridge on the day. So I suppose, yes, it was communicating with CU, but that function had been delegated to another officer.
Okay. Again, apologies for jumping around your statement, but if I could ask you to turn to page 14, and it's the second paragraph from the bottom. And the second line there. You say that a resourcing CU had been set up at the same time that the airwave channel was established. We have that resourcing CU as CU1. Does that sound right?
I don't know what command. I knew it was on a command unit, but I don't know what command unit it was.
And we have an arrival time for 02:59. Does that sound about right?
Yes.
Okay. Did you make any specific requests for resources to the resourcing CU?
Well, once the resourcing CU had been set up and that function was working, our resourcing requests went to that CU.
Okay. The next topic I'd like to discuss with you is the arrival of the protective equipment group. And again, apologies for jumping around. If I could ask you to turn to page 12 of your statement, where you deal with this in the final 2 lines on that page. First of all, just to deal with basics, PEG stands for Protective Equipment Group, is that right?
Yes.
And they were bringing additional BA sets, is that right?
Yes, so that sentence, the way that's worded, I suppose I should explain that a little bit better. So operational support units carry BA main control packs with them. Those are on a PDA for, when you request a certain number of fire engines, you start to get the operational support units and they all carry the main control packs. So you'll get those delivered. And it's basically a lorry, it delivers them. But alongside that, you also have a respiratory protection equipment logistics officer that will get informed of, when it goes to a major incident, they will get informed that a major incident has been declared, and they will then also make decisions to provide those resources to the incident. So those combined, those 2 functions provided equipment to me at my main control point.
Elsewhere in the document says reference to a BA support unit. Have you heard that phrase before?
I think that that's one of those 2 functions that that's referring to.
Okay, thank you. Now, Paul, I don't know whether you were able to set up the short instant log, which I think is at tab 23 of the documents bundle. If you go to page 24, on the top of page 24, at 03:05:51. First of all, apologies, Mr. Kipling, you've probably seen these before, but this is the short instant log for the evening. And you'll see there is a service request indicating that it was a message that was then sent by control to the incident ground, which states CU8 RPE unit with SDBA ETA 30 minutes, RPE unit with EDBA approx 1 hour. These have been ordered as the BA support units. First of all, just so we understand the terms that have been used, RPE stands for respiratory protection equipment, is
Yes.
that right? And so is that the same as the BA support unit? Or
Yes.
not? Yes. And does this message trigger any memory with you?
these messages can be difficult to, in this format, can be a bit difficult to understand, but
Yes.
my understanding from that would be, so what you do end up getting when the respiratory protective equipment comes to us is vans which have got cylinders in them, and I would have thought spare sets as well, but we already had lots of spare sets from the OSUs, so yeah, the spare cylinders and sets certainly turned up at around this time, so I would have thought that that is probably what that's referring to.
Thank you. If we could, Paul, if we could turn over the page to page 25 and look at an entry for 0354. There we go. 035405. This appears to be a record of a request from CU8 in respect of EDBA cylinders arrival. Do you have any memory of that message?
I don't remember that message, no. But that may have happened because of the resourcing information that we were giving them about how quickly we were going through the A, and they then made a decision that they needed more cylinders.
Do you remember being kept waiting for additional cylinders that you were expecting?
No, at no point did we run out of BA wearers that we needed.
If we go slightly further down that page to an entry at 040301, hopefully can see a message to attend with all EDBA sets available. Sorry, Paul, that's 040301. There we go, PM. And then if you can expand that to attend with all EDBA sets available. Can you help us with what that message means, in particular the last two lines?
I expect that this message has probably been sent as a result of the times and the information that we gave the resourcing function about how quickly we were going through BA wearers. And so, because of the speed with which we were going through BA wearers, I expect they probably sent that message to get as much BA resources down to the incident as possible so that we would have the BA when we needed it.
Does that message go to all the attending appliances?
That to me looks like a message that that to me looks like a message that's either gone on the call-out slip to the appliances that's gone to, and it's also presumably gone over on the main screen radio as a request into control to request that gets put on the call slip.
Would you have made the request for that message to be sent, do you think?
No, I would have sent. I would have told whether this was the incident at this point, whether it was the incident command pump or the resourcing command unit. I'm not sure at what point that changed over, but whoever was performing that function, I would have sent a message to the command unit saying this is the time that we need this many BA wearers, and they would have then made a decision to get that many BA wearers to me.
Thank you.
And that's what they did to achieve that.
Okay, if we can turn, Paul, would you mind turning to page 31 in the short incident log? And the time at 04:38:01, thank you. And the message passed to control that 60 EDBA cylinders leaving E43 on the bell. 36 will be collected next from Park Royal. 51 are at Barking, but currently no transport. Do you remember that message?
I wouldn't have seen that message.
DAC Fenton notes in his witness statement there was a request made for all EDBA wearers made at 0350. Do you have any recollection of that?
What exactly was the request?
He said there was a request made for all EDBA wearers.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't have seen that request, but it doesn't surprise me that message went because of the requirement for EDBA. And the reason why we needed to get as many EDBA wearers to that incident as possible very quickly at this stage is because we had calculated when we were going to run out of existing resources at the incident based on the rate that we were going through them at its height. So they are prioritising getting as much EDBA or BA resource to that incident so that it could meet our deadline that we'd given them.
Could I now turn to the question of problems with the BA sets that were encountered on the evening? And if I could ask you at this point to turn to page 13 in your witness statement, and it's really the second substantive paragraph on that page, which starts with the words, someone from PEG then spoke to me and said the BA sets which had been delivered weren't working. At this stage, we were going through 40 BA wearers every 60 minutes, which was at the peak of our volume. He told me they needed to be plugged into a computer to reset them, and it would take some time to do. I've since learned that this may have been a misunderstanding and that the issue was flat batteries. Do you now have any more understanding of what the cause of the problem was? Was it flat batteries? Was it something else?
Yeah, so when spare sets get delivered to an incident that aren't on the back of a fire engine, sets on the back of a fire engine are plugged in and they're on a trickle charge so that the charge always remains adequate. Every firefighter that arrives at an incident on a fire engine has a set. These sets that I'm talking about here are the spare sets that arrive they're not set up, but they're in sealed bags, and so they're not on a trickle charge. So when they turned up, my understanding is that the batteries were flat. It's worth noting that because of the system that we set up, where Brett was holding resources before they were sent in and we had resources further back at my marshalling area, we actually did have the BA sets to commit into the tower. This, when I was told in the midst of everything going on that the spare sets had flat batteries, it was a bit of a surprise, but actually it's cylinders that we need, not spare sets, because firefighters all have sets. Yep. So they go through their cylinders and they can then just replace their cylinders and use the same set again.
Now, flowing on from that, looking at page 13, it's the final paragraph on that page. You say, the second sentence, somehow by using the two batteries, the problem was solved. If it was the batteries that run out, by using these two, we were able to get an additional two sets, then at the time was enough to take resourcing pressure off. Are you able to say whether this issue had any impact on your ability to supply resources to the bridgehead or not?
No, it didn't.
Put more bluntly, did it mean that you were not able to meet the demand at any period during the night?
Sorry?
Did the problem regarding batteries mean that you couldn't supply
no.
the bridgehead? No.
When the battery problem happened, so the system we had in place was that my area, where all of the resources, where all of the people were, where they were resting and where we had fresh people, that was the last fallback. That was, if we'd run out of the forward mobilising area, my area was the last fallback. And I desperately wanted to avoid that because we had firefighters in this building. So when I say resourcing pressure, I didn't want to run out of wearers to send. If the request came in for me to send wearers, I did not want to run out. Having said that, if my area had run out, we still had the forward mobilising area which wasn't being used until it was requested from the bridgehead. So we had a number of fallbacks in place.
Thank you. Could I now turn to the issue of demand for EDBA? And if I could ask you to turn to page 14 in your witness statement, and really it's the first sentence at the top of that page, where you say, by now I'd received a message saying that we were using EDBA only. Do you remember who this message was sent from?
I don't, I'm sorry. I would guess probably Brett, because that was where I was getting most of the information from.
Apologies again for asking you a timing question. Are you able to estimate at what time you received that message?
It would be a guess.
Well, I don't want to ask you to guess, but if you're able to sort of use maybe 2:20 or 2:30 as your setting up time at the leisure centre.
3:30.
Okay. How long did the position that only EDBA were to be committed, how long did that last for? Can you remember?
My memory of it is that it was for a few hours.
You say that as a result of that you started committing people for a second time in EDBA, and that's the second sentence of that first paragraph. Do you have any idea how many firefighters were committed twice in EDBA?
At the time I did, but I can't remember now.
What process do you go through to determine whether it was safe to deploy an EDBA crew for a second time?
EDBA wearers, we will, to the best of our ability, enforce arrest on them for a period of an hour at least, and absolutely not use EDBA wearers on a second wear unless we really had to. Every single one of those firefighters desperately wanted to get into that building to save people. So in terms of second wears, we were using them. We were trying not to use them as much as possible, but it was very difficult to not use them because they desperately wanted to get back in. I would say that we achieved largely at least giving them a rest before we used them again.
And that was the mechanism you used to determine it was reasonably safe for them to do so?
Yeah, within safe, reasonably safe, I suppose, yeah.
What system did you have for recording who had been committed twice?
Gary Moore was writing it all down for me, and we also separated people who had already worn from people who we knew were fresh.
Do you remember an instruction that the bridgehead was only committing EDBA above the 10th floor? Do you remember an instruction to that effect?
Do I remember? So I heard, I think in my statement I write the 11th, but that may be wrong. I definitely at one point heard that they weren't going above a certain point.
Were you aware, were you made aware of any other decisions being taken by the bridgehead about where to commit BA crews?
Sorry, can you repeat that question?
Yes, of course. Were you made aware by Brett Loft or otherwise of other decisions being taken at the bridgehead about where to commit BA wearers?
No, it really wasn't relevant to my role. As I said before, it was resourcing the BA wearers. That was what I was concerned with. So the specific details of where people were going and what their briefs were, that wasn't my area of responsibility.
Now, for the period of a few hours where it was EDBA crews only, what were you doing with the SDBA crews?
Arresting them, sometimes a request. Because of the nature of the incident, it was a significant BA deployment. I had all of the personnel resources that, you know, so if other functions on the incident ground, such as pumps and pumping, were required, sometimes a request came to me because I had all of the personnel, and I also had a lot of SDBA wearers who were being arrested and not used. So sometimes a request like that came into me, and I released someone for that function.
Was there any point during the course of the incident that you were receiving requests for BA via Mr. Loft or otherwise that you simply couldn't supply?
No.
Turning back to page 13 in your statement, in the first substantive paragraph, 7 lines down, you say, I had over 40 people and needed to keep them in one place. Can you explain, was this the number of firefighters that you had waiting by the leisure centre throughout the incident? Did that number remain constant? I'll let you reread it.
Can you repeat the question?
Yes, of course. You say you had over 40 people and needed to keep them in one place. Did you have a constant constituency of 40, or did that number vary during the course of the night?
That number varied.
I apologise, it's probably a difficult question to answer now, but what was the lowest number you had? Can you remember?
Of people or of certain types of wearers?
People, let's start with that.
I would say once main control was set up, I probably never went below 20, I would say.
And of that 20, can you apportion those between SDBA and EDBA?
Well, if you're asked, would you like to know how low on EDBA
Yes.
I got? So, bearing in mind that at all points Brett had at least 10 EDBA wearers, I at one point got down to 4. But as I got down to 4, another 20 turned up. And that was at that 5:30 point, which is when we calculated we would get down to 0 in my area. Or not down to 0, but down to minimum.
Now, one of the issues one of the questions that arises from the evidence that's been heard thus far is whether EDBA crews were being deployed as swiftly as they could once they'd arrived. What system did you have in place for ensuring that EDBA crews were deployed identified and then deployed as swiftly and as efficiently as possible?
Well, we always had, from the point when BA main control was set up, we always had at least 10 EDBA wearers waiting outside the tower to go in as and when they were required. So as additional ones turned up, they came into my resting area. But so it would not have been necessary for people to turn up at the incident and go straight into the tower. That would have been, it needed to be controlled. And there was always a pool of BA wearers who could go into the tower at a moment's notice, more than anything, because we have to have emergency crews in case we have a firefighter emergency, which at this incident was extremely likely.
That's useful. If we can, looking at a particular example, I can take you to the telemetry sheet, but I don't think it's necessary. The second EDBA team to arrive at the scene was Chelsea, and it was Golf 346. They were status 3, I think it's 0147. Its members didn't tally out until some time later, and to give you an idea, there was Upton and Reddington at 0244, Cod and Joseph at 0303, and Syme at 0327. Now, to the lay eye, there appears to be a delay between EDBA crews turning up and then being deployed. What would be your answer to that lay concern?
When you say tally out, do you mean tally out of their bodyguard and into the entry control board?
Yes.
So it doesn't surprise me that a crew could turn up early and not get used for EDBA until later. They may have been used for other tasks, and then once that task was completed, they reported to my area in their sets to be sent into the building. So just because they were one of the first crews to turn up, but they didn't use their BA sets until another hour into the incident, that doesn't necessarily mean that there weren't BA wearers in the building. Right, but it's I don't know, because I don't know the full picture of the information you're talking about. It's difficult to.
Well, it's just looking at the basic time frame there that I think or rather the concern is that you have crews attending, say taking Chelsea as an example at 0147 and not being deployed until at the latest 327. Given the urgency of search and rescue, given the number of FSG calls, there appears to be a concerning delay between arrival and deployment. And I suppose that a number of questions arise out of it. The first one is, were you aware of that time gap between arrival and deployment, first of all? No.
I mean, there was hundreds of firefighters there. For me to know when they arrived and when they went into the tower as individuals, I don't know. But it doesn't surprise me that happened. I know that I was routinely sending BA wearers to the building, but in terms of what they did once they got into the building, I really don't know about that detail.
Mr. Kipling, thank you very much. Those are all the questions I've got for you now. So it might be convenient to take a 5-minute break to see if there are any other final issues arising.
Well, we'll do that in just a moment. Can I just ask one thing? I think the thrust of Mr. Kinnear's question is that on one reading of the data, it might be thought that there was a failure to use EDBA resources as swiftly and effectively as they were actually available to be used. Would you have anything to say about that? And that would arise from the fact that they appear to have been waiting for the best part of an hour in some cases to be deployed.
Is the data that you're talking about, are you saying that it shows that at one point there were no EDBA wearers in the tower?
No, that's not the suggestion. The suggestion could be that EDBA wearers, take the Chelsea group, arrived at the site apparently ready to go into action, if I can put it like that, but didn't go into action for perhaps half an hour, 45 minutes or whatever. And it might be suggested that there was a failure to use that resource as quickly and effectively as could have been done. Now, I don't think that would be your responsibility particularly, because you've explained that you were resourcing. But is there anything you'd want to say about a suggestion of that kind?
Just purely that I can only assume that they were taken up doing one of the many other tasks at a fire that is required, that is carried out. Just because they've arrived, it doesn't mean that they're necessarily going to get used for BA. A better reflection of the EDBA resources in the tower would be how many BA resources were in the tower, whether BA resources were in the tower or not. But certainly from the point when I set up my main control, we had BA resources. We never had a problem with sending BA resources into that tower when it was requested.
So it would really be a matter for the bridgehead, would it, to decide what resources they wanted and when?
Absolutely, and particularly given the size of that staircase and the difficulty that they presumably would have had getting up into that tower, you are limited to the amount of people that you can send in safely. Well, none of it was safe, but, sensibly.
Yeah, all right. Thank you very much. Well, I think the sensible thing would be for us to have a short break now. It may be that after the break there will be some additional questions that Council wants to put to you, or maybe not. We'll see how we go. So I'm going to rise now and we'll resume at 3:15. And at that point, we will know where we stand. Could I ask you please not to talk about your evidence while you're out of the room?
Yes, of course.
And we'll let you know if we need any further help.
Okay.
All right? Thank you very much. We'd like to go to the usher and then we'll rise. Right, 3:15 then, please. Yes, Mr. Kinnear, I think Mr. Kipling is going to come back in any event, and then you can tell us whether there are more questions for him. Right, thank you, Mr. Kipling. I don't know whether there are more questions or not at the moment. We'll see.
Mr. Kipling, I'm pleased to say there are no further questions. So, fortunately, sorry to have raised your expectations, but thank you very much for the assistance you provided today. It's been invaluable. So, thank you very much.
Yes, well, I'd like to add my thanks to that. I must say you've given your evidence in a very clear way, and it's very helpful. So, thank you very much for coming.
Thank you.
Good. And now you are free to go.
Thank you.
Yes, Mr. Kinnear.
Sir, apologies. There's not only going to be a change of witness, but a change of counsel. Mr. Peter Johnson will be giving evidence next. He will be examined by Mr. Myatt. There's the necessary domestic arrangements that need to be made, and so might I ask that there be a break for 10 minutes to allow those arrangements to be effected, and then for Mr. Johnson to give evidence.
We need another 10 minutes, do we?
Yes.
Well, put as attractively as that, what can I say? Yes. Well, look, shall I say I'll sit again at 3:30?
Thanks, sir.
All right, thank you very much. Yes, Mr. Myatt.
Mr. Chairman, I'm back. And our next witness is Peter Johnson.
Yes, thank you.
Now Station Manager Johnson.
Solemnly, sincerely and truly
declare and affirm
that the evidence I shall give
shall be the truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the truth.
and nothing but the truth.
Thank you very much, Mr. Johnson. Sit down and make yourself comfortable there. Yes, Mr. Myatt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Johnson, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Could I please ask you, first of all, to give the Chairman your full name?
It's Peter Johnson.
Peter Johnson. And can I begin by thanking you very much for coming to us to give evidence in this inquiry and to assist us with our investigations. We really do very much appreciate it. If at any stage you need a break, just indicate. And if at any stage you want me to repeat any question, I'm happy to do so.
Okay, thank you.
Can I ask you first then to take your statement, which should be in the first tab in the blue file in front of you, or else probably more convenient to look at it on the screen on the desk in front of you on your right. This statement is dated the 28th of March 2018 and it is MET 00013235. Can I ask you, have you read this statement recently?
Yes.
Can you confirm that its contents are true?
Yes, it is correct.
Thank you. Now we've also got your contemporaneous notes which are at MET quadruple 05344, which are there also on the screen. Have you read those recently?
I have, yes.
And can you confirm that the contents of those are true?
Yes, they are correct.
Thank you. Now we've also got some exhibits which run from PMJ1 through to PMJ8 with a number of different MET references. I'll try and take these quickly, just I have to read them into the record.
Sure.
MET 000-16975, 16974, 16972, 16971, 17598, 16997, 16998, 16999, 17000, 17001, 17002, 17004, 17005, 6, 7, 8, and 16970. Before I turn to my substantive questions, can I ask you this? Have you discussed your statement or the evidence that you're going to give to us with anybody before coming to give evidence today?
No, sir.
Thank you. Can I begin now then with the position you hold and your training? As at the night of the fire in June 2017, you were a watch manager at the command unit at Islington, were you?
That's correct.
Yes. But now you're a station manager at Hammersmith, is that right?
I've actually changed position since the statement was made. I'm a station manager in the Ops Assurance team.
In the?
Ops Assurance team at Union Street.
Right. Okay. So are you no longer on a command unit?
No, I have not been in a command unit for 1 year.
Right. You've been in the LFB, is this right, for over 25 years?
I've been in London for 20 years, but I've been in London within the fire brigade for 25 years.
Right, my mistake. But London for 20 years. And I think of those 20 years, you were on the command units for 5 years.
That's correct.
And you say on page 2 of your statement that you were given a 2 to 3 week OS course. This is in the 4th paragraph down on that page. You say you were given a 2 to 3 week OS course when you started the role. What is an OS course?
It's an operational support course. It's, as described within there, it involves IT incident issues, makes you understand and give you an appreciation of what the role is, and hopefully give you support and training so that you can deliver it within the role comfortably.
I see. And you do say it involves IT. When did you do this 2 to 3 week OS course? Do you remember?
That would be at the beginning of my time within the command unit, so that would have been close to 6 years ago now, so 2012.
Right. Okay. And where did you do that? Was that in London?
Yes, that was at Southwark Training Centre at that time.
Okay. Have you done any refresher courses on OS, particularly focusing on IT issues?
No.
Since then?
No.
Right. Now, you... Can I ask you this? Have you had training on high-rise firefighting?
In what respect?
Specifically in respect of how to handle fires which breach their compartments and spread through a high-rise block.
Specifically within the scenario you mentioned, no.
Right. Have you had any training on fire survival guidance?
Yes.
What was that training?
I initially was given the policy as part of the command units when I first started on the command units, as it was a new policy, asked for advice upon it.
Was that policy 790, as it was in its first draft after Lacanau?
Yes, that's correct.
Right.
I was asked for information upon that, which I gave information and feedback from a standpoint from the command units. I devised a training package for them, for the command units and also for the wider brigade, and also had some training also at Control that was delivered by Control concerning specifically FSGs.
Right. Have you had, or did you ever have any training on how to handle multiple FSGs within a command unit?
I devised a training package for specifically dealing with multiple FSGs.
Is that the package you refer to in your statement?
Yes.
We're going to come to that in some detail in a moment. Can I just ask you to look at page 5 of your statement before we do? On page 5 of your statement, you mention in the first paragraph that, and this is 7 lines down, you say, I also sat on the Fire Survival Guidance Policy Group and was there to provide feedback and suggestions from a command unit perspective. Now, first of all, just breaking that up, when did you join what you call the Fire Survival Guidance Policy Group?
That would have been around about 2014.
Thank you. What was the Fire Survival Guidance Policy Group?
That may have been a convoluted terminology for it, but it was people that would talk about the changes to a policy or potential changes to a policy that would be required as the policy was relatively convoluted and relatively complex. They wanted different people with different perspectives to be able to give different perspectives and feed into any potential changes that would be required. It was a number of people, group managers, namely a few station managers, and we'd sit down and talk about our experience with FSG.
When was the Fire Survival Guidance Policy Group established? First established, do you know?
Again, I'm regretting the term policy group. It was just the people that had an invested interest in it. But it was, I don't know when it was established, but I was asked to join by Group Manager Harrington because I had previous experience with FSGs and previous experience with training and a command unit experience. But it would have been regularly reviewed. Every policy that Fire Brigade has is regularly reviewed and given a review date. So as such of that would be something that you can reference within the original policy when the next review date would be.
When you joined it, who chaired or who ran that group?
My understanding, it was jointly chaired by Terry Harrington, and also Neil Withers had input within that as well. Group Manager Neil Withers.
Withers, right. Neil Withers. What rank was Neil Withers?
They were both group managers, both since retired from London Fire Brigade.
Right. And who else sat on that group? Well, let me ask you this. How many other people sat within that group?
I can only remember myself. There may have been other people in the room, but at the time it was just 4 of us, I believe.
How often did you meet?
We met a couple of times at Union Street, plus the draft policy was sent out for review, and then feedback was given about any recommendations that we would have. So on a more formal basis, track changes were made within the policy, and then feedback from myself was given and from everybody else about how we felt it was progressing as a policy.
You say you met a couple of times at Union Street and then that drafting changes were made. It sounds as if, is this right, that in fact it was an ad hoc group designed as, to amend or study is this right? Policy 790, but didn't meet regularly every year.
No, that is correct. So it was specifically set up for the purpose of trying to improve the policy as was first delivered.
Right. And Policy 790, as it stood as at the time of the Grenfell fire, was reviewed as current as at the 17th of April 2014. Was that version, the version that emerged as a result of your input that you've just described, which you looked at Union Street and then sent out for review?
Sorry, what was the date again, please?
April 2014.
Yeah, very possibly, yes.
I see, okay. And can you remember the date of the version of 790 before that?
I'm sorry, no.
Was there anything that prompted the need or perceived need to review and revise Policy 790, which led to its revision in April 2014?
No. All policies have a review period upon them when they are due to be looked at, and then it's up to the policyholder or the policyholder group to review them, and so that would have just been the natural timescales for the review for that specific policy.
Do you know whether there are any minutes or records of the meetings of this policy group?
I don't know that answer, sorry.
I'm only asking you because, having attended the meetings, did you observe people taking notes?
People would have made notes, yes, absolutely, to try and get the best policy moving forward.
Was there a formal minute taker or logist at the meetings?
I'm sorry, it was a long time ago. I don't remember that specific meeting.
Fair enough. At those meetings, did you express any particular views on any particular subject?
The entire subject was fire survival guidance, so my only views would have specifically been concerning FSGs and the complexity of the FSGs.
Right. Okay, let me ask the question a slightly different way. Do you recall having any specific input into the changes that came about as a result of those meetings?
The changes that I suggested and the changes that are ongoing, because I'm also now currently sitting on the FSG, it's within my department, so I'm currently feeding back. The changes that I wanted to be made at the time were not implemented and are hopefully going to be implemented soon, as I, again, hopefully will be able to see the implementation of those changes.
What were the changes that you wanted to be made at the time but were not implemented?
I wanted greater clarity into the roles and responsibilities for each individual at the incident. I wanted greater clarity on what was to be done with the information that was passed from control to the incident ground. I wanted a greater understanding that the amount of information coming in was potentially going to be too great for an individual or a group of individuals to adequately deal with. I wanted an understanding that the policy as it stood adequately could cope with what we dealt with in the past, but didn't ultimately look forward enough to anticipate a large-scale high-rise incident that involved multiple calls with potentially multiple casualties.
You've given us a very useful list of things that you wanted. What led you to want those things to be reflected in the policy, which wasn't reflected in the policy as it stood at that time?
So my understanding is that the FSG policy was initially brought about because of Lacanau House fire and recommendations that came out from that. The Lacanau House fire itself, although a great tragedy, could have been significantly worse. It was horizontal fire spread to a relatively low-rise incident. If it had been a high-rise incident, then looking at the way that the fire spread and the fire developed, my anticipation would be that it could be significantly worse. And I don't feel that the policy at the time adequately took this into account, and as such, we were not forward-thinking enough, and we weren't able to anticipate that we could have multiple calls, multiple FSGs, greater than what was provided within the policy, which was greater provided within the casualty information sheets alone.
Do you know why the changes that you wanted to be made to this policy in 2014 weren't implemented?
I don't know the answer to that, no.
Who did you make the recommendations to?
That would be to Terry Harrington and to Neil Withers.
Right.
Ultimately, it would have been Terry Harrington that would have moved forward, but again, you'd have to check with who he would be feeding that back to. So that would have ultimately gone with the policy holder, the person that has overall control of that specific policy in 2014.
You don't know who that was?
I don't know who that was, no, sorry.
Did you, just related to that, have any views at the time of these meetings about the adequacy of the training delivered, or training packages designed in the light of the Lacknell House fire in relation to FSG?
There were none.
There were no training, or there were no changes to the training?
There were no training packages at that time that specifically dealt with the delivery or implementation of FSG incidents.
Did there come to be training later?
Sorry?
Did there come to be training later?
They come to be training later specifically for some officers and command unit staff, but in 2014, or when I joined the command units, there wasn't any specific training, which was specifically why I was asked to devise a training package that could be used.
I see. Well, as I say, we'll come to that shortly. Can I just turn then to the next topic, which is the role of a command unit?
Certainly.
In terms of the role of the command unit, you say on page 2 of your statement, and this is at the end of the second last paragraph, that, it's the last sentence, the main role is to support the officer in charge. Now, can you just elaborate on that? When you say support the officer in charge, what does that functionally involve?
The best way to describe it would be there'd be staff in the officer in charge to ensure that you can help anticipate and support the officer in charge at an incident, to ensure that as we move forward, everything is anticipated, that there's a smooth run-in, that the anticipation of if the incident was to progress to be larger, that would be anticipated. If we need to make the incident smaller, that would also be anticipated. It would be to provide messages for the officer in charge and to prompt the individual officer in charge to send a message, and there's many different types of messages. It's also to enable that the mapping of the incident was correctly done, to ensure that the officer in charge had a broad understanding of the incident. We'd also be able to answer telephone calls from senior officers, monitoring officers, specialist officers from the council, from LALOs, from other interested parties, be it the police, ambulance, mayor's office. So it's a wide-ranging role that takes on different duties at each individual incident.
Yes. Just a couple of short points. Just for clarification, a LALO, I think, is a local authority liaison officer.
That's correct.
LALO. Yes. More substantively, everything you've just described sounds as if, is this right, that it would require very close communication between the CU and the officer in charge of the incident commander? It
depends on the individual. So that would be the role of the team leader. Somebody with experience. There are very experienced, good people out there, and there are people that are a little bit newer, a little bit greener. And anticipation is that the officer in charge would have a confidence in the team leader, and but you are working closely and you are the right-hand man, so to speak.
Just so we understand the hierarchy that you're describing, the team leader would be the team leader of the command unit.
That's correct.
And if there is more than one command unit in attendance at an incident, would there be one team leader with responsibility for all the command units, or one team leader per command unit?
To describe the hierarchy in that, it is one individual team leader who has ultimate responsibility over, in reality, all command units, but not in a hierarchical manner or a senior officer manner, but just as a designated first person there.
Okay. Now, in your statement, also on page 2, but in the last paragraph, you say that the role of the command unit staff is to provide vector training to watch managers and crew managers and you go on to say that the vector is a computer-based simulation system to simulate an operational incident and assess the decisions of incident commanders at incidents. How often is vector... well, as at the night of the fire in June 2017, to your recollection, how often was vector training delivered to watch managers and crew managers in London?
If you're a one appliance station, it would be delivered once a year for each watch. If you're a two appliance station, it would be anticipated to be delivered twice a year. But
Right.
also, individual watch managers can request for you to come down if they need extra vector training.
You go on to say that vector systems were used on a command unit but have not worked for the past 9 years. When you say have not worked, does that mean functionally were not operating or haven't been operated? In
Both.
other words, both, really?
Yes, they were a very poor system
Right.
with a very poor IT backup. They were outdated when they came on the run. Unfortunately, the different IT systems had issues talking to each other. I was formerly never trained within the use of the vector systems. As I go on to later say, we stopped using vector. Were the problems with vector and the non-use of vector something that was reported up the chain in the LFB? I mean, I only personally sent probably 20, 25 emails concerning it, but I'm sure other people sent more.
Was it a known problem?
Yes.
Did it cause known difficulties?
In what respect?
Well, was the fact that the vector systems on command units not working cause particular problems at incidents in your experience?
Incidents?
Yes.
Not at all.
Right. Did the fact that vector didn't work on the night of the fire well, I'm assuming it didn't work on the night of the fire at Grenfell, did that cause any problems?
No. So Vector is a standalone program that is used specifically for simulated. So to put it in blunt terms, it's like an Xbox or a PlayStation,
Right.
but with the technology from the 1980s. And it would enable you to be able to run through an operational incident in a safe scenario, supposedly, that would enable you to, as I said there, assess the competency of an officer in charge again on the rear of the command unit. It wouldn't have any way fed into use or required to be used on the night of Grenfell.
I follow. I understand. My understanding was that this was a piece of equipment on a command unit itself, but that's wrong, is it?
No, it's not a piece of equipment, it's a program,
program.
on a hard drive on a computer.
Right. Where would you normally get the vector training then?
It would be delivered on station, it would be pre-booked by the command units, and it would be delivered on station by the command unit staff, hopefully with a station manager in attendance.
Right. Now, you go on to say in the same paragraph, the computer system was very poor and didn't work, so off my own back, I created tactical decision exercises that we would deliver to watch managers to provide them with a selection of practical exercises for them to run through. It's recorded on a diary, but there is no outcome on competency or passing/failing. First of all, what would those exercises that you've just described there contain?
Tactical decision exercises are specifically there to, again, in a safe environment, give the opportunity for an officer in charge, a watch manager or a crew manager or someone aspiring to be a crew manager, the opportunity to be tested or run through an operational scenario. And it can range from a high-rise incident, a car fire, a boat sinking, grass fire, railway crash. It could take anything that the individual who designs it comes up with, really.
I see. And what did you come up with? When you say I created tactical decision exercises. Can you give us a flavour of the topics which those exercises covered?
So again, I created a high-rise incident.
Right.
I created a duck boat sinking. I created a train. I don't really want to give too many of them away because they're all kind of to be used by the brigade in future. But I also used large grass fire, chemical incident, terrorist incident, a skip lorry into a shopping centre, another high-rise incident, multiple RTCs.
Have you ever received any training in how to design these packages?
No.
What did you draw on in order to do so?
25 years experience of operational incidents.
You say you did them off your own back. That's right, is it? No one said,
It was through frustration of the fact that the
design your
vectors didn't work. It was through the frustration I've never had any adequate training in vectors. It was also through the frustration that the vector training itself was, if you've been on the fire brigade, if you've been in the fire brigade for a number of years, bearing in mind that, as I say in my statement, vector's been for 9 years, and there were a limited amount of incidents, you're pretty much sure you know exactly what's going to happen. So before the incident progresses, you can say, let's send a crew into the back of the house and save the child that we know is in the back bedroom.
Right. You say we would deliver them to watch managers to provide them with a selection of practical exercises. How would they be delivered? Would they be delivered on station by you?
Yes, myself and my colleagues would turn up at the fire station in the command unit. They would get on the rear of the command unit. Everything would be put in place, pictures, call slips and role players, and then we would progress an incident from there.
So it sounds like a kind of roadshow that you take around London. Is that, or do you do it to?
Sounds very a lot grander than it was.
Let me ask it this way: was this something that you offered to different station managers, and they accepted, and you came to their premises and?
It was watch managers, but we also did it for people that were
Right.
planning to become station managers during the promotion process. It was delivered extensively for people going for the station managers and group managers to enable them to be ready for the incident command exercises, which were part of the formal assessment.
Right. Well, your packages that you've described in your statement and now today to us, were they quality assured by or approved by anybody at LFB responsible for designing and delivering training?
I never had any feedback on them, no.
So the answer to my question, no.
No.
Right. Can you give us a date range of when you designed and delivered these TDEs?
The date range was basically from pretty much soon after I started, but I didn't formalise it until, I would guess, January 2016, where I started to make it more in a package. And the reason it would be more informal is because we would turn up at a station with Vector. The Vector wouldn't work. It would keep crashing, the computers wouldn't start up, something like that. So we'd have to do something, as you mentioned earlier, ad hoc, and do a drawing on the board and create something from that we would then deliver to the crews there. Sometimes just something as crude as getting a picture on the TV screen, which is something I regularly did, and then say, what do you see, where do you want to go from here?
Do you remember when the last training session was prior to June 2017 on these TDEs?
Well, the area of where Grenfell fell wasn't part of my area that we were responsible for training, but I would have done them, and I can check the station diary to inform the correct date, but we would do them once a week, or once a tour, maybe twice a tour. So we would be doing them regularly.
Right.
Especially during promotional rounds when people wanted to gain more experience, we could be doing 2 a day.
Right. Now, you told us that nobody in the LFB had approved the design or delivery. There had been no quality assurance. To your knowledge, were you the only person in the LFB designing off your own back these TDEs, or were there other senior officers doing the same thing?
No, I wasn't a senior officer, I was only a watch manager at that time. The frustration around Vector, as I said previously, was shared throughout the command units, and many different command units would create their own TDE, their own specific training package to be delivered at station in place of the Vector training.
Was anybody responsible in the LFB for making sure that those training packages delivered by different people, delivered and designed by different people, were consistent?
So the last sentence that's on the page there is the station manager was invited to attend, but they only attended on 5% of cases. So ultimately, the station manager on station that we would be visiting would hopefully be there to assess. As a watch manager, we are not in an adequate role to assess another watch manager or to give feedback. It would be the responsibility of the station manager to provide feedback on the performance. As to the performance of the actual TDE itself, no, I had no feedback or formal comments concerning them from anybody.
No. My question was really, was there anybody in the LFB ensuring that there was consistency between your volunteered self-designed package and other packages also being designed by other people in the LFB and delivered?
There wasn't, but to qualify that, you would say that what I was presenting was an incident. So it was irrelevant whether I was presenting a good incident or a bad incident. So the actual delivery of it itself isn't, in my view, overly important. It would be the performance of the individual during the incident that would be significantly more important and something that would need to be assessed.
Right. But in terms, I'm sorry just to harp on this, but in terms of ensuring the consistency of the principles being applied and the messages being imparted to watch managers as part of the packages, was anybody in the LFB looking at your package, comparing them with other packages and ensuring consistency of message?
Not at all, no. The command units themselves were, for a period of time, we had 2 station managers overseeing us, specifically the command units. Those roles then got deleted and the responsibility was passed on to the on-station station managers, and there was quite a lot of slippage between who had overall control and command of the command units and who would be responsible for delivering any QA at all.
Right. Now, you then go on later in your statement to talk about a tactical decision exercise based on fire survival guidance. Can I ask you to look at page 5 and look at this topic or subtopic? You say at the top of that page, when I joined the command units, the FSG policy was relatively new. We've covered that. And you then say, I was asked by my station manager at the time to devise a tactical decision exercise based around fire survival guidance. This was following the Lacknell House fire. I created a large exercise that mirrored a fire in a high-rise incident to provide a realistic scenario. This included numerous FSG calls, 2 to 3 command units, where people were trapped by smoke or heat. I delivered this exercise a couple of times. Now, I've read all that to you. I just want to ask you a few questions about that. Is that another tactical decision exercise that you designed essentially off your own back, even though you were asked by the station manager to do so?
Yes. So, would you like to give some round? I've forgotten the word. Sorry, you can carry on with your question.
Well, let me just ask it a different way. Who was the station manager? Do you remember?
That was station manager Tej Ajamal, who's since retired.
Right. Where was he?
He was
station manager.
He was the station manager of the command units, along with John Barker,
okay,
whose post was deleted.
Right. And do you remember when he asked you to devise a tactical decision exercise based on FSG?
Yeah, it was just after I joined. I'd asked for extra work and responsibility and approached him and said, is there anything that I can do? I'm very keen with a training background. I approached him and asked for some extra work, and as such, I believe that was around November, December 2012.
Because that was when you said you
yes.
went on to the CUs. Right. Now, did you have any help or any input from anybody else at the LFB in designing that exercise?
No.
At that point, so you've said late 2012, had you received any training on FSG policy 790 as it then stood?
In 2012?
Yes.
No.
Right. Did you use the version of FSG, the FSG policy then current, to design your TDE on FSG?
No. The TDE, as I mentioned previously, it's an incident. Following policy is irrelevant. It's, you know, I could come out with an alien spaceship crashes into Wembley Stadium. It doesn't mean I'm following a policy. The FSG exercise I created was to test the policy more, but the policy itself was irrelevant. It was to provide a realistic incident, the likes of which at that time in London we hadn't experienced, and to show that the policy may have had some deficiencies.
Yes. Now, the exercise you created, is this right, is what we see as Exhibit 7 to your statement. It's something that I think probably requires a bit of explanation. So can you please be shown, first of all, the first page of that, which is MET 000017001. Which I don't think is what I wanted, actually. Never mind. Can we start off with a different page? 000016997. Now, is that I think that's the first page of your... Is this part of the TDE you're describing?
Yes, that's correct.
Right, and that is... Could you just tell us what that is?
That is a picture showing a pager, which is the way that officers, station manager and above, are mobilised to incidents.
Right.
And it details, there, as you say, there are multiple calls to a fire in Lana Road, Erith, Kent.
In Kent. And we
is
see there...
in London.
Flonops 4.
Yes.
Can you tell us what that is?
So Flonops 4, that should in reality read Flonops 2, which is for a South radio channel. But it depends on who the... that is incorrect, that specific point.
Okay, well, that was was one of my next questions, but that's helpful. But the point about Flonops is what? Is it to indicate to the recipient of the page message what channel to use?
That is correct, yeah. So it's so that the station manager or above can turn their airwave radio on and monitor the incident remotely if any messages are being sent.
Right, now Flonops 4 would be used, is this right, for FSG calls specifically?
No.
No?
No, that's a north call sign. So you've got 4 and 2. 2 is the south, 4 is the north.
Yes, but all right then, Flonops, call it 2 in the south, would be used specifically for FSG calls under this exercise. Is that right?
No. No, that's specifically there, and it should read 2, but that's specifically there to say what channel to be listening to. So this printout is to give you a more of a realistic representation of what an officer in charge would be receiving prior to being mobilised to the incident.
Okay, well, the officer receiving this message would use Flonops 4 for what? Or 2?
As I mentioned, they'd be turning it on, they'd be listening for any messages, monitoring anything, but it's not specific for this incident. It's all calls within that geographical area would be handled within that channel.
So it's basically the main scheme.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes, I see. Now, just turning on to 16999, again, as part of the exercise you designed, we see what looks like a handover sheet. And we can see it. There's quite a lot of information in there. In the third paragraph from the bottom, you say, I am aware that control have received 1 FSG. Attached sheet details what we've done so far. In the exercise, what would the attached sheet be?
It should be within that package, but it would just detail that they've had 1 FSG call to the incident.
Right. Well, let's look at the next page. Which I think is a map.
Yep.
I'm not sure that the document was attached. Were you intending that what would be attached would be a formal fire survival guidance?
It's in the package.
Which well, could you direct us to the page?
So the details that will be passed over, if I can just very
yes, please do.
Quickly flick through.
Yes, I'm sorry to say that these have come in perhaps not the most helpful order to us, and therefore the numbering may not be very easy to follow.
If you look at MET 0001702_001.
Yes, that's what we're on.
Okay. -1.
Oh, -1. Ah.
So that is that would be a printout that would be not with all that information upon it, but definitely the first column would be recreated on a FSG pad and handed to the individual. So just specifically the number 1 as is detailed along the what is the second line there.
Right. Now you've got, on that page, while we're on it, you've got 7 slots for 7 premises. Is that right?
That's correct.
So is it right that this package wouldn't cater for the number of FSG calls, or number of premises at least, the subject of FSG calls greater than 7?
My understanding is that is the number on the FSG poster.
Yes.
That is provided within the command units.
Yes. Did you think that was a sufficient number to be able to design a package on FSG 4?
Sorry, could you repeat the question?
Yeah, do you think that was a sufficient number?
7?
Yes.
If you've got less than 7, absolutely. If you've got more than 7, obviously not at all.
My question is really, when you designed this package, did you think that using 7 as the maximum was appropriate to design in order to train people on FSGs?
Not at all.
You didn't?
No. The package, as it moves forward, would demonstrate the amount of people that would be needed for 7 and how difficult it would be with 7. I didn't want to do more. I mean, I could have done 30 if I wanted, but it would have only shown how significantly worse it was than 7. The whole point of the exercise was to demonstrate that 7 is a huge number, especially with the amount of individuals that were in each property.
Right. That's helpful. Can I then just follow that up and ask you to turn to, or be shown, MET 000017002? I think it should be 17002. I think you've got an extra 0 in there. That's it. So I think this is where it starts. We have the FSG, or the second page perhaps, we have the FSG sheets. Could you take us through this page and just tell us what you're aiming to show or to train the recipients of this package about?
To do that, it'd be best to describe the way that the TDE would be run.
Right.
So we would have 1, 2 or 3 command units, depending on the amount of command units that were available, and depending on what you're trying to demonstrate within the TDE. So the one command unit would be dealing specifically with command and control, another command unit would be dealing specifically with FSG, and another command unit would be dealing specifically with BA main control. What I wanted to demonstrate within this exercise was how convoluted and difficult the policy was, and how resource intensive it would be, and how difficult the communication channels would ultimately be demonstrated to conflict against each other. So to run through the incident, we would have an individual playing a control operative that would be remote from the incident or remote from the exercise in a room. They will be delivering information to the main command unit via hopefully the main CU critical FSG line, and passing the information on. That is, I believe, the first sheet that would be passed from control once the officer in charge has taken over. The officer in charge turns up, gets the information, would then go down to the command unit, and it's up to them to make the decision there and then. Do they continue with incident command, or do they take over the FSG incident command as you were, the incident command command unit? And as I say, it flows as an incident, and it's all down to it's a linear incident. It will always progress in a way,
yes,
depending upon how the officer in charge and the support individuals deal with the incident itself. But as you can see, if you follow the package further on, it does get progressively worse, with the fire spreading in a upward trajectory, trapping people by heat, smoke and fire.
Yes, we'll look at the pages in a moment just to trace that through.
Sure.
Before I do, can I just ask you some specific questions on this page?
Yeah.
Would you, looking at the left-hand column, or you've got a set of information in that left-hand column, by which I mean the one in bold, in black. Number of persons, location within premises, condition within premises. etc., all the way down to additional information. Would you expect, when you designed this program, all that information to be passed on by control to the FSG command unit?
Again, this is to demonstrate that the policy itself was unrealistic. So if you look at the top of the sheet, you've got a time of 12:13, and
Yes.
as you progress through the incident, it gets later by minute at possibly 4 or 6 minutes intervals. What was demonstrated throughout this exercise is that the information, although 70% filled in on that sheet, couldn't be adequately passed on in that time period, and as such the information was changing so quickly that the information couldn't be passed over to adequately demonstrate how the fire was progressing. That was the whole purpose of the timescale and the information. So the rest of it that's below, it isn't filled in, just for the simple fact that it would be impossible to pass that information on within the timescales of what I dealt was a realistic progression of a high-rise incident.
So just sticking on this page, and just looking at the fact that on this page we've only got 4 flats.
Yes.
Are you saying that even with only 4 flats, communications of all this information becomes difficult?
Yes.
Let's then flow through this document. Just help us as we go through it. If you turn to the next page, please. This is... Just wait for it to come up. Yes, Mr. Documents Director, if we could just go to the next page in this document. In other words, the next page which follows on from this. Well, that's nothing there, but the one after that. Right. The slight problem is that these are out of order on our system.
They're in order of mine.
Well, yes, all right. Perhaps let's try this one. MET 000017005. I thought it would have been queued up next, but I don't think it has. So what does that show us?
That's a Excel spreadsheet that was enabled you to understand the amount of people that will be deployed. It's got a rather crude representation of Firefighter Sam, but that was to give you an understanding of dragging and dropping crews and how many crews you have left available at each incident to be deployed.
And if you could then go to page 17007, which I think if I, yes, there. I think now that gives us, I think, the total timeline from 12 till 12:11. What does that show us? What would you learn from that?
So that specifically is my master schedule. That would be for myself or who would ever ultimately be running the exercise. And it's to enable for the 3 separate command units as colour-coded at the top, BA main control, fire survival guidal calls and bridgehead, and understanding at what minute by minute information would be happening to progress as the TDE moves forward. But again, I have to stress that the times slipped massively because in the delivery of this, we found that it was unrealistic, it was impossible, in fact, to pass the information on within those timescales.
Now, just moving on a little bit, what information, as a result of this package, what information would you expect to be fed back from the bridgehead to the FSG command unit?
I mean, that's an impossible question because it would be what actions have already been taken place.
Right.
It's, as I say, to be grandiose about it, I was the fire. How they responded is irrelevant. I'm still going to keep burning. It's whether they put it out or not.
All right, let me ask it in a slightly different way. What assumptions did you make when designing this package as to the flow of information from the bridgehead about deployments back to the command unit?
As I said, the timings are I thought relatively adequate and relatively realistic. The feedback that I got from it is that it's impossible.
Right. Even with just that number of flats?
It progresses significantly more from the original 4 to fill out the sheet to 7.
Yes.
And yeah, it just got harder and harder and harder.
You say on page 5 of your statement, and we may dip back into this policy or this training programme later on, but you say on page 5 of your statement that in the last sentence of the second last sentence of the first paragraph, just going back to page 5 of your statement, can I just show you the last 4 lines? In fact, on the first paragraph, you say this training never moved forward. This training never moved forward as was deemed not necessary or relevant and did not want to step over Babcock's, who are an external trading provider. Such decisions were made by numerous people, but it was Terry Harrington who ultimately said it wasn't going forward. He's a group manager and has since retired. Now, do you know who actually made the decision not to move your training package forward?
It was Babcock's.
Babcock's made that decision, did
Yes.
they? Which individual at Babcock's, do you know?
No.
Right.
It was, so specifically it's that London Fire Brigade don't deliver training. We've outsourced our training to Babcock's, and as such, they're responsible for delivering any specific training that we require.
Right. So your station manager asked you to devise this package. You
Yes.
devised it. We've
Yes.
seen it. Was it ever actually delivered?
Twice.
It was delivered twice.
At least twice, maybe 3 times.
Right. So it was actually rolled out.
Yeah, no, it was tested. It was tested. It was had a dry run a couple of times.
Right. And and then what happened next to it?
It didn't happen. It didn't go forward. I had a meeting with Terry Harrington and Babcock's, I believe after an FSG policy group meeting. They all agreed that it was a good package, but Babcock's ultimately decided it's something the London Fire Brigade shouldn't be delivering because it was training, and as such, we didn't want to be delivering training. It's responsibility of Babcock's to deliver training.
When you say did not want to step over Babcock's, what do you mean by that?
As I just said, we can't deliver training. We can deliver competency, but we cannot deliver, or affirmation of competency, but we cannot deliver specific training as a fire brigade. That is what our training provider specifically is there to do.
Did anybody at the LFB seek to persuade Babcock that this training should be adopted? Do you know?
Yes. Terry Harrington tried to. I believe Paul Jennings, who's a DAC now, was very positive. He did the first dry run with me. He found it very informative. Again, speaking to him, he may have a different opinion, but it was a realistic scenario that delivered exactly as I intended to provide. That the FSG policy is a very difficult policy that has many flaws.
I think the answer to my question is no. Or rather, the answer to my question I think is yes, but it failed. In other words,
lots of people in London Fire Brigade liked it. Quite a lot of people in London Fire Brigade thought it should go forward. Babcock said no.
Right. Now, I'm glad to be able to say that we can now find the rest of the TDE package. So I wonder if you could be shown MET 00017002, which I think takes us to the end of the slide. Now, that at least takes us to yes, that's the one, isn't it? That takes us to 6 flats.
Yes.
I think there's a 7th to be filled in.
Yes.
But just show us what that tells us in terms of how the FSGs have developed through this training package.
So if I'm correct, the original time was 12:13, and that was then how it was set as a high-rise incident. So the first sheet that you saw, the crew manager handover, you'd turn up, the crew manager would be sketchy to prompt the station manager to take over, and again, as I mentioned previously, to make the decisions about whether they're going to be on the FSG incident command vehicle or whether they would be the BA main control or ultimately the incident command. Each sheet that you flicked through, if you notice that there are items in red, and that's differences between the previous information that's been passed on, and as such it's either getting worse or in some cases getting better, and the blue information is new information that was going through. This was to colour coded to make it sure that the person that was role playing the command, as you were the control individual, would be able to pass on adequately the information and know just by colour coding what was new. What would be happening was the time, as I mentioned, would be slipping. So if we started at 12:13, at 12:35 we wouldn't be anywhere near being able to pass this information over, and that was adequately displayed on every time I displayed this exercise.
Right. Just in general terms, was the purpose of this TDE to demonstrate how challenging and difficult communications would be once you had 6 FSG calls? Or was it to train people as to how to handle communications once you got up to that number?
In reality, it was both. In reality, it was to ensure that people had appreciation of how difficult FSG was going to be, and also have an appreciation that it would be nearly impossible for a group of people, and sometimes we had up to 15 individuals involved within this TDE. It would to show that it's not easy, and as such potentially that the policy needed to be amended and changed dramatically to ensure that if we did have anything over 3 or 4, we could adequately deal with it.
Right. 2 follow-up questions. First of all, and you've talked about amending the policy and your input into that in 2014, so later than this, I think.
Yeah.
But was the policy 790, ever actually amended to cater for this kind of volume of FSG calls?
No.
And to ensure this kind of communication?
No. There was this isn't the only thing that I did surrounding FSG. There were other suggestions that came out of this about passing of information concerning FSGs that were put forward back in 2014 that ultimately did not happen.
Right. And secondly, from your knowledge and experience, did LFB or Babcock's, I think Babcock's, deliver FSG training which was similar to or to this program that you designed, or
No.
at least is sought to impart those principles?
No.
Mr. Chairman, I'm about to move to a different topic, and it's now just before 4:30.
Yes.
I'm happy to use the 2 minutes if you want me to, but
2
I'm
minutes
not.
isn't going to
I'm not
save
going
the
to
day,
finish. It
is it?
isn't. It's not going to finish this witness. So I'm going to have to ask the witness through you, if he doesn't mind coming back tomorrow morning. You'll appreciate, Mr. Chairman, that we have had some slippage in the timetable, which is, I think, fixed at a pretty steady 90 minutes. And I'm trying to work out behind the scenes how to deal with that. But in the meantime, I'm very keen to finish this witness tomorrow, if I can.
Well, first question, Mr. Johnson, can you come back tomorrow morning, please?
Of course.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry to have to ask you to do that,
That's right.
but that's how it is, I'm afraid.
It's okay.
So may I simply ask, simply because I'm being asked about availability of witnesses the following day, how much longer are we likely to be with this witness? Because we have Mr. Wolferton and Mr. Loft tomorrow.
Yes,
And we may have difficulties getting either one of them coming back the next day.
yes.
I understand.
Well, you've anticipated my question.
Yes.
Thank you. Yes. What's
Well,
the answer, Mr. Miller?
to be blunt and safe, I will say another hour and a half, because that would cater for any further questions that might come. There are a lot of questions which you'll appreciate, which have come from different sources, which we have reviewed and which we have taken the view have to be asked. So, Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry if that comes as something of a disappointment to you.
Well, it does.
Yes.
And I'm rather concerned about the way the timetable is now shaping up.
Well,
But we are where we are for the moment, and having started Mr. Johnson, obviously we must finish him.
Very well.
So I'm afraid, Mr. Johnson, I have to ask you, as I said, to come back tomorrow. Sorry about that.
Yes. In the meantime, in order to deal with Mr. Walsh's and your concerns about the timetable, I will do what I can to see if I can shorten the questions I have for the next two witnesses, which is Loft and Wolfenton, and see if we can finish by the end of the day tomorrow. But I should say, to be absolutely candid, I think that may be a push. They're important witnesses, and I don't want to rush them.
Right. Well, it may be that we need to review the timetable.
Well, maybe. In which case, I will take.
But that's something
we'll
we'll have to do, not on off the cuff. So we'll see.
Very good. Great.
Anyway, I'm pausing because I'm waiting for the usual applications to be.
Yes. Yes. Well, in a sense, I'm.
Maybe it's not going to come.
Well, I've been pushing at an open door, but I'm slightly nervous about asking for a 9:30 start because I'm not entirely sure I know what the witness's availability is for 9:30. But I think that it's okay if he comes at 9:30. But I just need that hit confirmed.
I'll be in London from 7. If you want to start at 7, we can start at 7.
Now that's a tempting offer from the witness.
Yes, it is tempting, but I'm afraid it's not going to suit everyone. It shouldn't be like that.
I'm going to take my life in my hands, if I may, and ask for a 9:30 start, Mr. Chairman.
Yes. Well,
but I appreciate it is an exception, but we're, I think, in an exceptional week.
well, it's becoming the rule. That's my concern.
Yes.
And I don't think it does suit everyone to start at 9:30 because many of the people here have other things they have to do and fit them around the working day. But I think this week, or at least tomorrow, yes, we can sit at 9:30.
Yes.
That obviously does suit you, Mr. Johnson. And we'll see where we're going.
I'm very grateful, Mr. Chairman.
All right?
Yes, thank
So,
you.
Mr. Johnson, 9:30 tomorrow, if you wouldn't mind.
Certainly.
And I have to ask you not to talk about your evidence to anyone overnight.
Okay.
All right?
Thank you.
So would you like to go with the usher now? And thank you very much. Right, 9:30 tomorrow then, please.